Dear students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am V. N. Prabhakar from Archaeological Survey of India. In this paper on principles and methods of archaeology, I will be dealing on the exploration techniques in archaeology. So here in this module, our main objectives will be to understand what is archaeological exploration and what is the necessity of the archaeological exploration, to trace also the history of archaeological exploration techniques, and to understand the various exploration techniques used currently in archaeology. So if we look into the earlier periods of the archaeological exploration, how it actually developed, if we look into the 18th and 19th century CE period, so it was mainly based on the sensational discoveries like a kind of Pompeii or Herculaneum in the Europe, and also some sporadic digs happening all over the world, and particularly on the private property of wealthy landowners. There was very less understanding of chronology or history of a particular region or territory, and objects of historical and artistic interest were being collected and traded. That was the main objective behind it. There was no scientific approach. There was nothing as a kind of scientific exploration techniques that was developed during the 18th and 19th century. So basically it was the wealthy landowners, wealthy people, they were collecting the artifacts from various places and they were displaying in their private collections. Later it developed into kind of museums. Like in the Indian context, we have example of the Salarjung Museum in Hyderabad, where it used to be a private collection. Later it became a very good museum. And these kind of activities were going on, and simultaneously there were very important activities going on in the 19th century, like the decipherment of the hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs was a script used to write the Egyptian language in the Egyptian kingdom, Egyptian dynastic kingdom, where they were using a separate kind of script which could not be readable during the modern context. But it was deciphered by Champollion of French, a citizen. He deciphered the hieroglyphs. Similarly, cuneiform, it was being used as a script in the Mesopotamian region, the land of the modern Iraq and Syria, where they used this kind of script to write their inscriptions. This was also deciphered during the 1850s actually. This actually enabled to read thousands of inscriptions in Egypt and Mesopotamia, which created a very good understanding of the history of both these territories. So these civilizations were better understood, the dynasties were understood, and also the dynastic lists were drawn, and a better chronology was developed. Remarkable discoveries like this were happening, and one more thing is that of the discovery of Troy based on the Iliad and Odyssey. This Troy city was identified with the Hisarlik in Turkey region, modern Turkey, by Hendrik Schliemann and Frank Calvert, and ultimately it was discovered in 1871 also. So similarly, other discoveries were happening, like the tomb of the Tutankhamun by Howard Carter. It is one of the most important and remarkable discoveries of the modern era, which created a very good understanding of what kind of tomb contents in the Egyptian kingdom and how they were mummifying, and all these things were happening. And even today, discoveries are being made, and many of these discoveries are made accidentally, like the you might have heard about the terracotta army in the Shaanxi province of China, where the large terracotta warriors of the 3rd century BCE Chinese ruler army was discovered. So similarly, in Indian context also, we have remarkable discoveries being made accidentally, like the late Harappan cemetery at Sanoli in western Uttar Pradesh, which brought to light a very large and remarkable cemetery datable to the 2nd millennium BCE. So these kind of activities are happening, and in the presence of better written records, we can understand it better. Like if you look into the earliest phases of the excavation, how they were carrying out the excavation, it was how scientific thing was being developed. We have instances from several parts of the world. This period of archaeological excavation and exploration, it belongs to the speculative phase. I mean, we were only speculating things. We were not applying our scientific endeavor. We were not applying scientific techniques. We were just speculating something and trying to prove that these things exist in the past, like what happened in the United States of America during the 18th and 19th century. Most of the burial grounds, they were being understood to the mythical mound builders, but it was not the correct case. I mean, later the excavation and the analysis of the artifacts, it proved that the ancestors of the Native Americans, they were actually building the kind of tombs which are being investigated. Several concepts of archaeology is also being developed simultaneously, like the concept of prehistory. It was being developed remarkably by the discoveries in the France by Boucher Deep Earth, who correlated stone tools with the extinct faunal remains. Because the stone tools, they were found in association with some of the faunal remains, the animal bones which were already extinct, but the fossils have been found, and they could correlate with some of the extinct faunal remains datable to around 500,000 years ago with the stone tools. So it clearly indicates that the humans, they created the stone tools, and they were also existing in contemporary nature to the extinct animals. So this is a very remarkable discovery. Similarly, concepts like the three-age system, it was mooted by C.J. Thomson, who proposed the three-age system, like the ages of the stone, ages of the iron, and the ages of the modern age. So these kind of concepts were being developed, and how the human progressed from the stone age to the copper age to the iron age. So these things were developed, and also archaeologists, they were borrowing the several scientific concepts from other disciplines, like from the geology. The concept of stratigraphy was being borrowed, and this sort of concepts were being developed in the geological discipline, mainly by James Hutton and Charles Lyell, who are the pioneers in understanding the stratigraphy and the uniformitarianism processes being happening in the geology of the earth. So when we apply these things to the archaeological context also, we can correlate which one is earlier, which one is later, and how the present day archaeological processes can be correlated with the past. So next important understanding in the archaeological discipline is the field techniques, how we develop the field techniques, how from the speculative phase we were only speculating things, and how now we are applying the various methodologies of scientific discipline. So in this regard, we can understand how the human depositions happen in the past, in the present, and how that can be correlated. So one of the pioneers in this aspect is the pit rivers, who pioneered the recording techniques in an excavation. Initially, it was sporadic digging. Anybody, they can go to the field and dig with a shovel or any tool. But now they are recording everything. They are recording each and every strata, recording each and every antiquity coming from the strata, and they are also understanding the changes happening within the artifacts. So William Flinders Petrie, he also did some meticulous excavation, and he recorded various artifacts in his excavation in Egypt. He developed a technique known as the seriation. Like if you look into the figure, I mean, we can go on correlating various models of a car. Like if you look into the Maruti car in the 1980s, late 1980s, it was a different model. But if you look into the present day Maruti car, it is a different model. So correlating the various models, we can build up a relative chronology. So looking into the model, one can say, okay, this belongs to the 1980s, this belongs to the 1990s or 2000. So this kind of relative chronology was developed by Flinders Petrie. So similarly, later in the 1920s and 1930s, the concept of stratigraphy was very well applied, and Kathleen Kenyon was one of the pioneers along with Mortimer Wheeler. So Mortimer Wheeler, when he was appointed as the Director General of Archaeology in India, so he excavated remarkable sites. He excavated Takshila, he excavated Brahmagiri, he excavated Arikemedu. There he applied the methodology of stratification in a very well manner. He also used the system of grid square excavation, where he applied the various techniques, and also documenting the artifacts in a three-dimensional context. So all these concepts clearly indicate the development of from the 18th and 19th century onwards to the 20th century, how the discipline is being developed. So similarly, in the archaeological exploration also, we have various things happening. In the Indian context, if we slightly trace the kind of archaeology, what was happening, the remarkable things is the founding of the Asiatic Society in 1784. Then there are several individuals and scholars who are investigating the past. The most important being James Prinsep, who deciphered the Brahmi and the Kharosthi script, which enabled to unravel the Indian history, and also people like Meadows Taylor, Robert Bruce Foote. They were all working in different parts of the country, and they were making some remarkable discoveries. But all these discoveries, they were all again a chance find, or maybe just go to the site, discover the objects, report them, and not applying any scientific means. They were just recording whatever they're coming in their way of investigations. Like Robert Bruce Foote, he was a geologist, but with this geological interest, when he was surveying the various parts of the country, he came across the prehistoric tools, and then he kind of reported them. So this is the way of initial day of archaeological exploration. But later, this developed into a separate field, and nowadays we apply various kind of scientific techniques. So we have various other individuals. I mean, if you look into the whole list of individuals coming from the archaeological context, where in the Indian context, where we see many people working in various parts of the country and discovering various periods of artifacts, like the megaliths, the Neolithic artifacts. They are coming from different parts of the country, and they were being excavated and also explored in a systematic manner. So there were in this context also several foreign expeditions also they came into India. Like the best example is that of the De Terra and Patterson, the Yale Cambridge expedition, who came and who investigated all over the India, and the first modern kind of scientific exploration, we can say. I mean, they were correlating the archaeological artifacts with the ancient geological formations, and they were also trying to understand what kind of geological era these artifacts belong to, and they were fixing some chronological background also. And another remarkable thing happened during this period is the discovery of Mohenjo-daro, and also the excavation of Harappa. And ultimately, the excavation from these both sites led to the discovery of the Indus Valley civilization. So our history, Indian history, which was at that point of time not going back to 6th century, back to 6th century BC, now it goes to around 3rd millennium BC. So if we sum up the what we have learned so far, we have been tracing the history of archaeology in a global context, in the Indian context, and how the interest of the wealthy people and also sporadic explorations was mostly happening. But if we look into what is actually exploration, exploration is such an important thing. It is a very less expenditure exercise. It precedes any excavation, because excavation is a destructive methodology. I mean, if we remove a certain deposit, archaeological deposit, it cannot be returned back to the original condition. So it's a destruction. So exploration, it has various kind of advantages. It always precedes excavation, and it is the very basic tool to search and identify remnant of any human activity in the past. So we have from the initial days of discovery and even plundering of artifacts, we have examples of people just go and plunder a place, recover the artifacts, sell them in the antique market, and then leave the site in disarray. So now it has transformed into a multidisciplinary approach. We apply various kind of scientific methodologies into the exploration techniques. So we have traveled various stages from the random surveys to problem-oriented surveys. Now we call the exploration as a problem-oriented surveys. We identify a problem, we go to a region, we develop a hypothesis, so we collect artifacts and we test the hypothesis and ultimately understand what is the pattern of human culture in that particular region. So if we look into the post-independence era, I mean, the kind of exploration done by Alexander Cunningham. Alexander Cunningham, what he did that, he followed the travelogue of Huinsang and Fahian, and he visited all the Buddhist places. But during the post-independence era, a hypothesis was created, and the former Director General of Archaeological Survey of India, A. Ghosh, he surveyed the dry bed of the river Gaggar in the modern states of Haryana, Rajasthan, and he discovered a host of Harappan sites. So if we look into the Harappan site distribution, we can very well understand now how the Harappan sites are located not only on the Indus River, but also on its tributaries. Tributaries like the ancient Saraswati, which is now generally identified with the river Ghaggar in India and the Hakra in Pakistan. So we find a large number of Harappan sites. The mature Harappan sites you can see, they're all located along the Indus as well as the Ghaggar Hakra stream. But if you look into the right slide, you can see the late Harappan sites that is happening around 1900 BC, where on the Indus River we have very few sites, but on the upper stream of the Ghaggar Hakra system we have a large number of sites. So these kind of understanding, systematic understandings comes into picture. We also have chance discoveries, as I have told you earlier, how the cemetery at Sonoli was discovered. It was discovered in 2005 and later the excavation brought to light around 116 contexts of human burials. You can see how human burials are placed there and the general kind of arrangement. So this was excavated for nearly 1 year after the initial chance discovery. Another chance discovery is coming from Mandi in Uttar Pradesh, where a large hoard of gold jewelry was discovered by chance, and again it proved to be of the Harappan context, datable to around the 2nd millennium BC. So these kind of accidental discoveries also turns into certain remarkable discoveries of human presence in a particular period, and that's how we unearth various remains also. So we have understood what is exploration, what is the importance of the exploration, and how we can go about that. I mean, what are the various steps in which we can follow for exploration, carry out exploration. So it can be done through archaeological sites, locating them using old maps and Google Earth, because we have very old maps particularly of the South Indian or the South Asian context of the travelers and other people coming to this part of the world around 17th, 18th century. They were creating maps, and at that point of time the geography and the terrain, it might be different, and comparing to the modern context we can come into locating very different sites. So we can also locate archaeological sites using ancient literature and travelogue. As I have told you before, how Alexander Cunningham used the travelogue of Xuanzang and Fahian, and how he identified various ancient settlements across the North Indian context. The archaeological sites can also be located through remote sensing surveys. Remote sensing surveys consist of various equipments from low-flying kites to hot air balloons to satellites in the outer space. So we can locate archaeological sites using various techniques, using various sensors fixed in the satellites. We can discover the sites. And also archaeological sites are basically located through ground surveys. It is the very basic thing. After all this kind of the first 3 or 4 techniques what is listed here, the last one is the most important, because unless and until we go and search on the ground, we cannot locate an archaeological site, we cannot understand to which cultural period it belongs to, and all these things. So it is the most important happen. So we will discuss each and every technique one by one, how the exploration or the reconnaissance is happening. So first we will look into the locating archaeological site using old maps and Google Earth. How we can locate, because as I told you before, many people were visiting the South Asian context since the 17th and 18th century, when the Indian rulers, they were interacting with the European powers, that traders and travelers, they were coming, and even before that we have travelogues, but we don't have detailed maps. So we have these kind of old maps which can be tallied with the literary sources and the previous works also, what kind of investigations they have been carried out in a particular region. One of the best example I would like to quote is that of Alexander Cunningham, who wrote a book on the geography of ancient India. So collecting various sources from the travelogues of Xuanzang and Fahian, collecting sources from the Alexanders, we see the historians who accompanied Alexander. He used to pinpoint various cities and sites, the rivers where the crossings were made, and he produced various kind of maps. So from these maps we can understand the ancient location of the city. where Xuanzang came and moved from one place to another. So he also mentions about the distance between two settlements, what kind of people were living there. So based on this, Cunningham was able to identify majority of the sites in North India wherever Xuanzang went, and he exactly traced the route of Xuanzang. So this is very well understood. So these kind of things also help in creating maps, also actual maps created during the 18th century. We have one such instance, the Henry Beveridge, who in his book gives a map of the North Indian territory. I mean, if you look into the map, you can very well see to the south of river Satluj, there is a dry river. It is mentioned as Gaggar, but beyond a certain point, there is no continuity. So, during the third millennium BC and even much earlier, it is understood from the various remote sensing surveys and the geological surveys, this river extended further into the Thar Desert, traveling parallel to the Indus and ultimately draining into the run of Kutch. So these kind of instances, at least in the 19th century, one can understand looking into the map, the river is flowing up to a certain point. So these kind of evidences can be obtained from the ancient maps also. So similarly, the topo sheets are very good evidences which should be used by any explorer, because before going to the actual field, one has to study the terrain, one has to study the contour, what kind of things are there. These topo sheets, they were being created by the British since the very beginning of the 20th century. So it is also having a history. And the topo sheets of the 1920s, 1930s, when compared to the 1960s and 1970s, which are being created, are very good evidence. These topo sheets also indicate ancient ruins. They say certain points are there, ruins, abandoned settlements. So these kind of things can be understood. So from the map which I am showing here, it is from the Kadir Island, where the Harappan site of Dholavira is located. It is an island in the Great Run of Kutch. So there are places mentioned like abandoned places. So if you go there and look there, it may contain ancient remains, because there used to be a settlement in the very early period. Later it was abandoned. So the surveyors of the particular point of time, they mention that these places have been abandoned. So this could be one such approach. So taking to the next level, the Google Earth, because Google Earth is a open source tool available to any explorer now. So from the images available in the Google Earth, you can also see the ancient river courses. So in the image also, you can see there is a very wide band is shown, and also some squares are shown there. They are the ancient Harappan sites. So you can clearly see on the dry course of one ancient river, there are settlements. How these settlements can happen? If you look these kind of dry courses, you can always have a possibility to explore on the dry courses and locate this ancient settlement. So this is how the technology can also come into. We will see the application of technology in exploration in the next module, but just to have a glimpse of how Google Earth can also be used to understand certain geographical features without going actually in the field. So this is one such application. So we can also locate archaeological sites using ancient literature, as I told you before. So this ancient literature, they are very much helpful in the actual geographical location in certain cases. Like we have the ancient Sanskrit and Tamil literature, which gives clear clues of location of cities and port towns. Particularly the Sanskrit literature, it helps in understanding the ancient geography and names of the rivers. Like example, in the Rig Veda, it mentions about a host of rivers, starting from the Yamuna, Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, Satluj, and all these rivers in a sequence. So if you look into the sequence of the rivers mentioned in the Rig Veda and correlating the ancient and the modern names, I have given the modern name in brackets and the ancient name outside the bracket. You can see how these rivers can be correlated with the modern day and how these rivers were mentioned in the sequence. So they were mentioned like from the east to west they are mentioned, and from that we can also understand the relative location. Like Saraswati river is mentioned between Yamuna and Satluj. So it is clearly understood that the Saraswati, it is located between these two rivers and we cannot search it anywhere. So these kind of basic understanding of the geography can be obtained from the ancient literature. And as I told you before, the foreign accounts also when correlated with our ancient literature, it can very well give the understanding of the ancient cities. One such ancient travelogue is the Periplus Mari Erythrae. It's a travelogue. It's a literature available by an unknown author who gives the names of port cities located from the east coast of Africa to the Gulf of Africa, the Red Sea coast, the Oman coast, and the western coast of India. The most important port cities he mentions, and that could be also clearly searched upon and located even to the modern context. Even today, there are certain difficulties in identifying some of the important port towns. There are controversies, but to a large extent, many of the major ports have been identified, like Baruch has been identified, Archaeology has been identified. So these kind of things can be understood with the help of these travelogues. Like as I told you just before, how the literature helps in understanding the geography. This is the illustration. I told you the location of relative location of various rivers. Here I have tried to show you how Ganga is located on the extreme right, then comes Yamuna, then there is a wide blank in between. We don't have any major river here, but the Rig Veda mentions Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, then Satluj. So the Satluj river is located in between these two major rivers, and now it has dried up. So we can clearly place this river, the dried up river of the period of composition of Rig Veda, and clearly mark it on the ground. Okay, this is the geography of the Rigvedic period. So this kind of broad-based understandings can be had from the ancient literature, and again we can go and search on ground these dried up rivers, because these dried up rivers were mentioned by ancient literature. It means people were living on the bank of the rivers and they were composing the Vedic hymns, and now it is dried up. So we may find settlements on these dried up rivers also. So this kind of understanding can be obtained from this kind of literature. And this is the plotting of some of the important port towns mentioned by the Periplus Maris Erythrae, the unknown author which I told you. So this was the period during the 1st century CE when we had extensive trade relations with the Western world, particularly the Roman Empire, and these traders coming from those regions, they were passing on information to the fellow traders to understand the relative locations of the port towns, the interior ruling dynasties, what kind of material is coming from these places. So this is a very good source for locating our ancient ports, and then the field survey starts. So this is another evidence which we can do. The next component is locating archaeological sites through remote sensing surveys. What is remote sensing? Anything separated from the ground. I mean, you do standing on the ground some certain kind of documentation separated from the ground, from the air. It is known as remote sensing. It may be an aerial survey, it may be a hot air balloon survey, or a survey used from a satellite. So these kind of things are very well understood in the scientific explorations also, but we will see those things in a detailed manner in the module on scientific tools. We will here deal only with the traditional methods of exploration techniques here. So next comes the ground surveys, because these ground surveys, they are the ultimate tool which one goes to the field based on the knowledge obtained through reading the ancient maps, travelogues, and the preliminary investigations. Then they go to the field to survey, because this is the most important component. Unless and until one goes to the field, he cannot understand what is the terrain, what is the kind of artifacts coming from there, and to which cultural period it belongs to. But you have to remember, it is a very time consuming exercise, because much time has to be spent, much area has to be covered by foot. But it is a very good option when compared to the excavation, because excavation, as I told you before, it is a destructive exercise. And further, if you look into the advantages here, remote sensing surveys, it can only give a broad perspective of the sites. because we are only obtaining certain broad-based understandings. But those kind of understandings can only be confirmed through a ground survey. So this is very important. So that what kind of methods that can be adopted in the ground survey? There are various methodologies that can be adopted. One methodology is the village to village survey. I mean, people go from village to village, they select a particular district. So this was the major kind of exercise which happened during the 1950s and 1960s, before the problem oriented survey came into existence. So archaeologists, they were moving from village to village, locating the archaeological remains, they're plotting them and recording them, what kind of things are coming. But later the concept developed into surveying the entire landscape, because the villages, they are a modern concept. They are the modern habitation localities, but it does not correspond to the ancient habitation. So in order to understand the ancient habitation, we have to survey the entire landscape. What is the drainage pattern, where the rivers are coming, what are the ancient rivers, what are the dried up rivers. So we have to widen our search in the entire landscape to understand and locate the sites in the landscape. So this is the most important component, and the concept which developed later on during the 1970s and 80s, and also combined with the proper sampling strategies, because you can survey a very large landscape, but you can go on spend your time. If it is a 10 square kilometer area, 20 square kilometer area, you might be end up the entire lifetime for surveying the area. But if you use a sampling strategy, then you can arrive at a conclusion with a very less effort also. So the sampling strategy is very much important. So in the next slide we will see on the various methods that can be used in the surveying techniques. So statistics come into picture here. I mean, statistics is one important tool which can be applied to any field, and again in archaeology also that can be used in a very important manner. So we have various methodologies here based on the probability theory, and which is also known as probabilistic sampling. So there are two methods. One is the non-probabilistic sampling and one is the probabilistic survey. What is the non-probabilistic survey? It is not based on statistic method. It is only necessitated to do several ground realities, nature of the terrain to be surveyed, experience of the investigator. So several kind of biasness comes into picture here. If the excavator believes that this region is important, then he go on survey there. If he does not believe that, then he goes to a different area. So this is a kind of unscientific approach. But employing a probabilistic survey, we employ certain statistical methods that can be applied on the ground. So again, it can be divided into various categories like simple random sampling, stratified random sampling, systematic sampling, and stratified aligned systematic sampling. So we will be looking into one by one. What is the simple random sampling? So what happens? I mean, I have tried to illustrate here. Imagine this is a survey area. They, I mean, taken up from a Google map, and you can see the dry riverbeds here delineated by the curves here. So here I define an area here. I define a maybe a 20 square kilometer area or a 10 square kilometer area, but I am not going to survey the entire area. So my time is very limited, so I am not going to survey the entire area, but I select certain grids only. The white areas are the grids which I select, that is randomly. It's not based on any approach, just randomly I select them using the random tables. In the statistics, we use the random tables to arrive at certain numbers and calculations. So accordingly, we select these grids based on these random tables. And if you have more number of grids, if you have more time, you can select more number of grids, then the sampling will be better, the result will be better. But if you have less number of grids, again you are having a bias approach, because you are going to having a conclusion based on a lesser sample size. There are certain drawbacks of this approach. What is that? The actual, if the survey may lead to remains outside the defined boundary area, because we are very rigid here. We are defining a boundary area, we are restricting here within the boundary area. But if we actually do the ground survey, we find certain important remains outside this boundary area, then it is lost. So that is one major drawback. And the selection of the grids also, it is very difficult. It may lead to certain clustering also. So that is one drawback, one more drawback. So the next sampling strategy is the stratified random sampling. How it is done? Here, the survey area is defined not as per any random square or rectangle, but based on the natural features. Like here, I have tried to define the boundary based on again the dry river bed, and again I have chosen an area where the confluence of two rivers. You can see dark patches coming from the north, east to southwest, and again one coming from the east here, the right hand side. So they are meeting at a point. So these two dry courses, they are from river Drishadwati and river Ghaggar. They are joining at a place known as Suratgarh in Rajasthan. So this area I have selected. So again, we can select the grids based on the natural features. I have selected the grids here. You can see the different number of grids based on the location of the different areas. And again, I have selected the pink squares directly on the riverbed. You can see the pink squares. Why it is on that riverbed? Once upon a time, it was a very wide riverbed spreading to 8 to 9 kilometers. Now it has restricted very much to a very narrow band. So sites were located even on the riverbed also. So these kind of strategies help in understanding the archaeological sites in relation to the natural features, not on any random approach decided by the explorer. So next comes the systematic sampling. So this is one more method. Here the grids are pre-decided with some certain equidistance. You can see the distance between the grids. They are kept as a constant and located, spread everywhere. You can see it is located as per my requirement. I decided to place these grids in a certain manner, so I go on exploration. So again, this is a bias approach. So there is a incremental possibility of missing potential squares. So for example, in between these two squares, if a site is located in the ancient settlement pattern, if they decided to locate another site at a certain distance, so those two sites will be missed in this kind of gridding. So these three techniques, even though it is a part of a statistical approach, it has certain drawbacks. So the next one which we are going to discuss is known as the stratified unaligned systematic sampling. It is supposed to be the best method or the best suitable method among the four strategies. Here what happens is the elements of all the three previous sampling strategies have been put together, and it has been used based upon the requirement. The fixing of the boundaries discarded here. The orientation of the grids, you can see it is decided as per the orientation of the river. You can see the course of the river is selected. It is in it's in a northeast to southwest direction. So the grids is also, they are aligned according to that direction. So these kind of things may help in better understanding, better sampling of a very large area. So next, one more technique is known as the linear surveys or transects. So these are very modern concepts, and even though it has been applied since the 1980s and 1990s, in the Indian context, very less work has been done using these kind of strategies. Here I have selected an area keeping Kalibanga as the core area, the central point, and there are transects, I mean north to south transects here it has been given. So they may extend to several kilometers, but these areas they contain different pockets of dense vegetation. They may have lakes, they may have rivers, everything. But the explorers, they move in a group. They follow the path once selected and transect the entire landscape, go on documenting each and every artifact, each and every site coming across their path, and they locate them, and then the final results are understood. So they follow a path, linear path of defined width and length, and surveying all features, whatever may come into it can be surveyed, and keeping a core area as a central point, central focus. So we can understand in this kind of surveys, we select an important site, or we select an important settlement, an archaeological site, and to understand this settlement in the overall landscape, what kind of various other settlements are located. So as I told you before, 4 to 5 archaeologists can be there, and they can do this study. So we have reviewed the development of the exploration techniques, the development of the kind of various kind of strategies what can be employed, how from the initial survey techniques to the latest kind of linear transects we have come into. So there are a whole lot of developments happening, and there are certain case studies also available. I mean, if you read the case studies, you can also understand what kind of techniques they are actually useful. So I have selected 1 or 2 case studies here, and given an example here. The first one is the case study done in the ash mound area, Neolithic ash mounds in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. It is known as the Herders Monuments, ash mounds of southern Deccan Neolithic area. So I have given the reference also. If you look into the reference list, you can read this article and also understand what kind of things have been done. So here what they have done is a systematic integrated data collection, what they describe. So it is about collecting information arriving from the field work. They documented each and every ash mound, because ash mound is one important archaeological feature which we find in most of the northern Karnataka and certain regions of Andhra Pradesh. So drawing site plans, again gridded systematic survey which I discussed previously, and also transects of the engineered sites. So the whole lot of approaches were combined together, and using the statistics and computational strategy, this data was integrated together. They have integrated together to develop cartographs, digital maps, and also imageries, digital cartography. So you can develop a landscape based on this digital cartography, and photographic archives were also used to create a GIS. So GIS is one approach. It's known as a geographical information system, which we again study in more detail in the next module on scientific application. So these things were integrated together to understand the overall context of the human settlement, how the ash mounds are located, what is the overall landscape, and what are the other settlements in relation to the landscape. So one more example I would like to quote is the Sanchi survey project. It was done by Julia Shah in one of the publications in 2005. There is a series of publications of Julia Shah, so you can also read this from the reference list. So what she did is that she wanted to understand the Buddhist monastic settlement of Sanchi, because everybody knows Sanchi is a huge monastic complex, Buddhist monastic complex. Stupas are there, but it is located on a hill. It was not located in isolation. There could have been many more settlements all around. There could be pathways, there could be ancient roads. So she surveyed a large area to understand the religion, urbanization, state formation, economic change, agricultural activity. So all these things was her objective. So she defined her intensive exploration area. She collected even the sediments from the dams and reservoirs from the nearby places, then mapping, and also used the systematic remote sensing. So her study, it helped in understanding the role of Buddhism in that region during the starting from the 3rd century BC onwards, in establishing agricultural and water management practices, because there in the particular region, unless and until we have a proper water management system, the agriculture cannot be supported. So these surveys, it helped her to understand the role of Buddhism in establishing the agricultural practices, and also the roles of the dams and the reservoirs. Another very good example is Anuradhapura survey project. It is from Sri Lanka. It was done by Robin Cunningham and his team in 2006. There is one publication, you can look it in the reference list. So it was a huge intensive survey of nearly 50 square kilometer area radius with Anuradhapura at the center. If you remember the Google Earth map which I showed earlier on the linear transect survey, I showed Kalibanga as an example. Here they have actually done with Anuradhapura at the center. So they had a random transect of about 10 kilometer crisscrossing all aspects. As I told you before, whatever coming in between, they will go across and explore. Here they were encountering rocky outcrops and ridges, streams and rivers, grasslands, forests, tanks, villages, and paddy fields. So 10 archaeologists were there in a team, and they were working in a transect. This survey helped in identifying various categories of sites like ceramic scatters, monastic stone pillars and walls, metalworking areas, conical holes, rock outcrops. So whole lot of things were understood. So these are all very good examples of understanding a landscape along with a very large settlement as its core. So this is one approach of understanding the ancient landscape using intensive exploration, and the linear transects, they are proving to be very good in this aspect. So far we have seen a whole lot of features of archaeological exploration, how it is useful in understanding our past, how it is used to unearth the human remains, how it is very less expensive when compared to excavation, how it is not destructive when compared to excavation, and all these things we have seen. So in conclusion, exploration is a very low cost exercise, one can say, because it only requires certain gadgets, certain old maps or literature, travel logs. Then if you have the resources, you go to the field and adopt a proper strategy, sampling strategy, and explore. So it can yield a very good result from large landscape, because the sites cannot be seen in isolation. Any site did not exist in isolation. It existed in a landscape, it existed in a geographical region. So we have to understand the large landscape to understand the overall picture. Again, the techniques of survey, they are multifaceted, as I explained to you, but if you understand the various kind of techniques used, we can always choose a very good approach, and that can be employed for the exploration. So sampling strategies can be always used, and also multi-pronged approach is always helpful. It's not that only we should choose one strategy. We can always choose a multi-pronged approach and explain the various kind of features that can be found in an archaeological exploration, and combined together in a computational and statistical platform, we can obtain very good results. Thank you for listening the lecture. I would advise to read the other components of the module to understand more. There is a reference list. You can also refer to the articles mentioned, the references. Thank you.